EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas rejected calls for a Europe-wide army on Monday. She warned it could create dangerous gaps in the chain of command with NATO. Kallas spoke at a security conference in Norway amid US warnings about shifting priorities. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre told the conference his country monitors Russian nuclear submarines just 100 kilometers away. He challenged President Trump's claim that European NATO members contribute little. Støre highlighted an upcoming NATO exercise with 25,000 troops in northern Norway and Finland.
We are trying to do in European
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said Europe cannot defend itself without US support. He urged the EU to more than double military spending to change that.
Right now the situation...
Kallas denied any rift between NATO and EU members. She stressed Europe must invest more in defense while working hand in hand with NATO.
Our weaknesses and
We're here at the World Governments Summit, where, of course, discussions focus on the geopolitics, on trade and diplomacy. The biggest European delegation, I should note, is led by the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who has taken a very active voice in the region. He advocated for the two-state solution for Palestinians and also was very critical of the war in Gaza. Also on the agenda, and this is really a question permeating this conference and the region beyond the UAE, but also the Gulf, is the situation in Iran. As you know, talks are expected to take place this week between a U.S. delegation and authorities in Iran. There's a question as to whether or not talks to restart a nuclear deal can take place and de-escalate the situation in the country, which of course escalated after Iran cracked down violently on protesters. As also remember that President Trump has been clear and repeated many times that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. In this region, of course, the question is whether or not military escalation and conflict can still be avoided. The other big subject very much on the diplomatic front is Ukraine, because this country, the UAE and Abu Dhabi in particular, will now host another round of talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Yesterday, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Russians, if they take the right steps, they can still or potentially lead the way to an acceleration in the talks towards a peace deal, but also said that up until now, Russians had not really changed their goals. And this, of course, is happening in a very difficult context for the Ukrainian people, with temperatures dropping below 20%, the energy infrastructure heavily damaged. And that means there is a population currently now freezing in Ukraine. I should also stress a note. The German Chancellor yesterday said that this is no longer the moment and is not the right time for the Europeans to engage directly with the Russians, suggesting that the Kremlin has not moved an inch from, quote, their maximalist goals.
France's 2026 state budget was definitively adopted on Monday, following the rejection of two no-confidence motions in Parliament and months of political gridlock. The motions were tabled in response to Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's decision on Friday to invoke Article 49.3 of the Constitution, which allows the government to pass legislation without a vote from MPs. One motion was tabled by the far-right National Rally, the other by left-wing parties, excluding the Socialists. Since both failed, the budget has been automatically adopted. Since the 2024 snap elections left Parliament divided, lawmakers have failed to agree on how to fix the country's public finances. Lecornu accused parts of the opposition of causing disorder by blocking budget talks. Tehran said it had summoned all the European Union ambassadors in the country to protest against the bloc's decision to classify Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terror group. Meanwhile, the EU says it still expects diplomatic channels to remain open, despite listing the IRGC as a terrorist organization on Monday. The EU's designation came after Iran's violent repression of nationwide protests, which killed thousands. After this, in more of a symbolic gesture, Iran also classed EU armies as terrorist groups, a listing the EU has rejected, as well as all terrorist accusations. Meanwhile, Iran has ordered the start of negotiations with the US on the nuclear issue on Monday. The move comes as Iran faces the threat of US military action, as it has moved its USS Abraham Lincoln carrier and several guided missile destroyers towards Tehran. But Iran warns that any US military action would lead to a wider conflict in the region.
US President Donald Trump said he plans to lower tariffs on goods from India from 25% to 18%. Trump said that India would also start to reduce its import taxes on US goods to zero. The decision comes after Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed to stop buying Russian oil. Trump has long demanded India to do so. India emerged as a major buyer of the cheap Russian oil after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, providing Moscow with a crucial export market as much of the world sought to cut off its reliance. The US president has previously voiced that he believes targeting Russia's oil revenue is the best way to end its war against Ukraine. For his part, Modi said he was delighted by the announcement of the tariff reduction. He praised Trump's leadership, saying it was vital for global peace and stability. The announcement of the agreement comes as U.S. negotiators are expected to hold another round of trilateral talks with Russian and Ukrainian officials in Abu Dhabi later this week.
Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have agreed late on Monday to testify in a U.S. House of Representatives investigation into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The move comes after Chairman of the House Oversight Committee James Comer advanced contempt of Congress proceedings against the pair amid months of political wrangling. Comer had moved the contempt resolution through the House Rules Committee, a final hurdle before it headed to the House floor for a vote. Congress has never held a former president in contempt, a process which requires compliance through testimony and comes paired with substantial fines and prison time. The Republican lawmaker said he's not immediately dropping contempt charges against the Clintons, saying a deal for their depositions hadn't been finalized yet. The Clintons had earlier tried to negotiate their cooperation through means other than depositions, though Comer had refused. A vote on the House floor would, however, be detrimental to the Clintons, as 9 of the oversight panel's Democrat lawmakers support the charges against Bill and 3 against Hillary. Bill Clinton's well-documented relationship with Jeffrey Epstein in the late 1990s and early 2000s has re-emerged as a focal point for Republicans in the push for a reckoning over Epstein.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
Israel has reopened Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt on Monday for a limited people-only traffic, marking a significant step forward in the U.S.-brokered ceasefire. The opening appears largely symbolic at this stage, with the established quotas of people allowed passage daily being extremely low. Egyptian officials said that only 50 Palestinians will be allowed to cross the enclave in both directions daily. Israel added that up to 50 Palestinian patients, accompanied by 2 relatives, will also be given passage. Local health officials in the enclave say that some 20,000 people are hoping to cross into Egypt to receive treatment for their injuries and wounds. At the current quotas, it would take more than 1 year for those in need to leave Gaza for treatment. The UN also estimates that some 100,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced outside of Gaza during the war. At 50 a day, it could take well over 5 years to repatriate those wishing to return home. Officials did hint at the numbers of travelers increasing in the future, pending the success of the current system, but gave no timeframes as to when that might be. The EU, which is overseeing the Israeli and Egyptian vetting of Palestinians at the border, has welcomed the reopening, but called for more aid to enter the territory to help those in need. Meanwhile, the Egyptian Health Ministry announced that it had prepared 150 hospitals across the country to receive Gaza's injured and wounded in the days and weeks to come.